I wish I could take her out and go out to eat and do things like that. But you can't really. We'll get some help and we'll take her out the car and we'll drive around and look at stuff. Every day she'd wake up and realize someone had called today to tell her mother had passed away. And her mother died every day for like 3 years.
Just 1 minute ago, the world changed. Jay Leno, the ever-charismatic late-night host, took to the airwaves not with a joke, but with a revelation so chilling it froze millions in their tracks. Cameras cut to his usual, reassuring grin, but today, it felt different. His eyes betrayed something serious, urgent, almost horrifying. For decades, viewers had tuned in expecting laughter, celebrity interviews, and harmless banter. Tonight, however, Leno's monologue shattered that comfort. He began with a subtle pause, a rare moment of hesitation that made even the most skeptical audience lean forward. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of unthinkable news, he revealed what no one was ready to hear. The news wasn't about politics, weather, or celebrity gossip. It was deeper, darker, something that would ripple across households, social media feeds, and news outlets worldwide. People felt an instinctive chill, as if the familiar glow of their televisions suddenly cast shadows that had always been there, but never noticed. By the time Leno finished the announcement, Twitter exploded, news alerts flooded smartphones, and every late-night talk show was forced to pivot. The horrifying truth he had delivered wasn't just shocking, it was a turning point. A line had been crossed, a secret exposed, and a collective disbelief settled over millions. And yet, beneath the fear, curiosity ignited. Who or what was behind this? How deep did it go? And most importantly, what would happen next? Tonight, laughter would no longer serve as a shield. Tonight, the world saw the edge of reality as Jay Leno reported it, and the view from the other side was terrifying. It started like any other evening for millions of Americans. Phones buzzed with routine notifications, dinner simmered on stoves, and televisions flickered to life, ready for Jay Leno's familiar opening monologue. But from the very first words he spoke, it became painfully clear that tonight would be different. Leno's usual charm was there, the casual smile, the witty inflection, but it couldn't mask the seriousness in his eyes. He cleared his throat, and for the first time in decades, the room seemed to fall silent, not with anticipation for a punchline, but with the weight of something unspoken. He leaned closer to the camera and said, almost quietly, "What I'm about to share, it's not easy to say, but it needs to be heard." And with that, the world's collective heart skipped a beat. The revelation wasn't gradual. There was no slow buildup of suspense. Within moments, Leno revealed the horrifying truth, a massive breach in global security, one that involved technology, governments, and corporations in ways that few could even comprehend. For years, the warning signs had been there, scattered in obscure reports and quietly leaked documents, but nobody had connected the dots. Until now. As he spoke, viewers felt an uneasy mix of disbelief and dread. Experts were suddenly on the phones of news channels, attempting to explain the implications in real time. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended within seconds. Ordinary people struggled to process the enormity of what had just been disclosed. Banks, power grids, and even communication networks, everything could be affected. Leno's words weren't just news, they were a siren, alerting the world to a crisis that had been quietly building for years. The terrifying part wasn't just the scale, it was the personal stakes. Leno shared stories of individuals whose lives were already upended, of families who had lost everything because of systems most people trusted blindly. Names, faces, and testimonies flashed across the screen, grounding the abstract horror in painfully human reality. Suddenly, it wasn't about politics, entertainment, or global intrigue. It was about survival, trust, and the fragile illusion of safety. For some, the shock led to panic. People rushed to secure their homes, double-checked financial accounts, and debated what information was reliable. For others, it sparked anger at governments, at corporations, at the unseen forces that had allowed this to happen. Leno, in his calm but grave tone, urged viewers not to succumb to fear but to stay informed, prepared, and vigilant. Yet, as the broadcast ended, a more profound fear lingered. What else was out there that nobody knew? If this revelation could shake the world so deeply in 1 minute, what else might be hidden, quietly shaping the lives of millions? In living rooms, offices, and cafes across the country, people stared at the blank screens after the cameras cut away. The familiar world they had known felt suddenly fragile, unreal, and distant. And somewhere, beyond the cameras, beyond the headlines, the machinery of chaos quietly continued, reminding everyone that Leno had only scratched the surface. By the end of the night, one thing was certain: nothing would ever feel normal again. The world had been warned, and the horrifying reality of it all was only beginning to sink in. The morning after Jay Leno's shocking broadcast, the world woke up to chaos disguised as routine. News alerts flooded phones, screens in homes and offices blinked red with urgent warnings, and social media was in full meltdown mode. Millions replayed the segment, dissecting every word, every pause, every subtle inflection. Desperate to understand the scale of what had just been revealed, authorities scrambled to respond, but even they were caught off guard. Statements were issued, press conferences called, yet nobody had all the answers. Agencies admitted that what Leno had disclosed: global systems compromised, sensitive information exposed, and a network of hidden operations spanning continents was far beyond anything they had anticipated. The sheer magnitude was paralyzing. Meanwhile, ordinary people grappled with disbelief and fear. Grocery store aisles emptied faster than usual as some stockpiled essentials, while others tried to ignore the news, burying themselves in daily routines in a desperate attempt to maintain normalcy. In cities, offices, and homes, conversations began with a single question: did you see what Jay said last night? Corporate giants felt the tremors immediately. CEOs and executives huddled in conference rooms, assessing damage control plans. Stock markets reacted with volatility as investors panicked. Tech companies, whose systems were implicated in the revelations, raced to assure customers that safeguards were in place, but uncertainty hung heavy. Because the broadcast had made one thing painfully clear: nobody was truly safe. From the unfolding consequences, for journalists and media outlets, it was a feeding frenzy. Reporters chased every lead, digging into documents, leaks, and insider testimonies. Opinion pieces flooded the internet, ranging from measured analysis to wild speculation. Every news cycle became dominated by one central question: how deep did this crisis go? And who was responsible? Amid the chaos, human stories emerged: ordinary lives affected in extraordinary ways. Families who had trusted financial institutions found accounts frozen or inexplicably compromised. Workers who relied on digital infrastructure saw projects collapse overnight. The ripple effect of Jay Leno's announcement wasn't just theoretical. It was tangible, intimate, and terrifying. Even celebrities and public figures were not spared. Many reached out to the public through social media, offering reassurances or calling for calm. But their influence was limited against the sheer magnitude of fear. Leno's broadcast had triggered something unprecedented: a collective, global awareness that the systems everyone relied on were far more fragile than anyone had imagined. Despite the turmoil, there were pockets of resilience. Communities began organizing, sharing information, and preparing for contingencies. Online forums and local networks buzzed with discussions on cybersecurity, emergency plans, and practical measures to navigate the uncertainty. People were afraid, yes, but they were also beginning to act, proving that even in the face of horrifying revelations, human ingenuity and solidarity could shine through. By nightfall, the world had changed irrevocably. Governments, corporations, media, and ordinary citizens all were united by a single, undeniable fact: Jay Leno had pulled back the curtain on a reality that could no longer be ignored. The fallout would be felt for weeks, months, and perhaps years. And as the dust settled, a new question began to dominate conversations everywhere: what comes next? One thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The broadcast was no longer just a moment in television history, it had become the moment. The world collectively realized how fragile its foundations truly were. And in the silence that followed the frenzy, people couldn't help but wonder: had the worst already happened, or was it only just beginning? By the third day after Jay Leno's shocking announcement, The world had entered a state of uneasy vigilance. Governments convened emergency meetings behind closed doors. Intelligence agencies scrambled to assess the scale of the breach, and tech companies worked around the clock to patch vulnerabilities. But despite the frantic activity, a sense of helplessness permeated every sector. The revelations had exposed not just failures, but the existence of forces operating beyond the reach of conventional oversight. In Washington, D.C., the halls of power were alive with tension. High-ranking officials whispered in conference rooms, their faces grim, knowing that the breach wasn't just about stolen data, it was a blueprint for chaos. Across the globe, similar scenes unfolded. London, Tokyo, Berlin, and New Delhi all saw leaders convening in urgent sessions, analyzing what Leno had uncovered. Every decision carried weighty consequences, yet nobody had all the facts. The broadcast had revealed the tip of an iceberg so massive that even experts struggled to grasp its full scope. The public, meanwhile, oscillated between panic and disbelief. In homes, living rooms became war rooms. Families printed documents, secured electronics, and debated evacuation plans. Social media threads shifted from speculation to survival strategies, with ordinary people exchanging tips on how to protect themselves digitally, financially, and physically. The atmosphere was thick with fear, but also an undercurrent of determination. Humanity, when faced with the unimaginable, instinctively searches for control. Journalists, once chasing headlines, now became investigators. They dug deeper into obscure documents, traced corporate networks, and confronted public officials with uncomfortable questions. Every revelation uncovered new layers of secrecy, offshore accounts, hidden servers, and complex webs of influence that had operated in the shadows for years. It became clear that the crisis Leno had exposed wasn't isolated, it was systemic, embedded in the infrastructure of daily life. In tech hubs and cybersecurity centers, experts warned that the breach could have cascading effects. Transportation systems, healthcare networks, financial institutions, nothing was immune. This isn't just data, one analyst said. This is a roadmap for disruption. Every system we rely on can be manipulated, exploited, or destroyed, even as governments issued statements to reassure the public. Insiders privately admitted that containment was only partially possible. Meanwhile, the human toll began to emerge. Families reported sudden financial losses, small businesses faced cyber attacks, and some communities experienced widespread service disruptions. Panic buying in certain regions caused shortages, while misinformation spread rapidly, complicating efforts to maintain order. The broadcast, meant to inform, had inadvertently triggered waves of chaos, but it had also exposed the fragility of the systems everyone depended on. Amid the upheaval, whispers of shadowy entities began circulating. Unnamed groups, previously unknown to the public, were now suspected of orchestrating some of the breaches. Governments denied involvement, corporations shifted blame, but the hints were impossible to ignore. The public realized that what Leno had revealed was only the surface layer. The deeper, more dangerous forces were still hidden, watching, and waiting. By the end of the third day, one thing was undeniable. The world had entered a new reality. People no longer trusted convenience without scrutiny. Systems once taken for granted were now examined with suspicion. And somewhere, behind the scenes, unseen forces plotted their next moves, aware that the world's attention had been drawn and that the chaos had only just begun. The broadcast had been a wake-up call, but the true test was yet to come. As governments, corporations, and citizens scrambled to adapt, one question loomed over everyone. How far did the threat go? And what would happen when those forces decided to strike again? For now, the world braced itself, knowing that the horrifying truth Leno revealed was only the beginning of a storm. Nobody could fully predict. By the fourth day, the world was fully awake to the storm that Leno had exposed. Panic had given way to action. Governments, corporations, and communities realized that mere acknowledgement of the crisis was no longer enough. Decisive strategies were essential. Emergency task forces were established, special units mobilized, and intelligence networks stretched to their limits, all racing to anticipate the next move of the hidden forces revealed in the broadcast. In Washington, A high-level summit convened, bringing together leaders from multiple agencies. Every briefing highlighted one terrifying truth. This was not a conventional crisis. It wasn't a single hacker group, a rogue nation, or an isolated leak. What Leno had uncovered was part of a sophisticated, multi-layered system of control that had been operating in the shadows for years. And now it had been exposed. The challenge was immense. Stop the threat before it escalated, all while keeping the public calm enough to prevent mass hysteria. Across the globe, corporations scrambled to contain damage. Financial institutions implemented emergency security protocols. Tech companies patched vulnerabilities at record speed. And transportation and energy sectors coordinated with government agencies to prevent systemic failures. But even as these measures were rolled out, experts warned that the clock was ticking. The breach had revealed weaknesses so deeply embedded that any delay could have catastrophic consequences for ordinary people. The impact was immediate. Some neighborhoods organized community watch groups to protect against potential cyber-related disruptions. Families reinforced digital security measures, while schools and hospitals created contingency plans to maintain operations under unstable conditions. The crisis had transformed daily life into a test of vigilance and adaptability. Every action, every decision mattered. Meanwhile, journalists continued to dig, uncovering a web of hidden alliances and secret operations spanning governments, corporations, and unknown actors. Their reports revealed shocking betrayals. Trusted institutions had allowed vulnerabilities to fester, sometimes deliberately. Public confidence eroded as more names, accounts, and connections surfaced, showing that the horror Leno reported was only a symptom of a deeper, systemic failure. In private, experts worked feverishly to predict the next moves of the unseen forces. Simulations, encrypted communications, and intelligence intercepts painted a grim picture. Whoever was behind this had anticipated exposure and was ready to exploit the panic. It was a calculated game, and the world was playing catch-up. Leno's broadcast had triggered awareness, but awareness alone was insufficient to neutralize the threat. As the day progressed, small victories offered glimmers of hope. Some systems were stabilized, leaks contained, and immediate threats mitigated. Yet the global community understood the stark reality. Containment was temporary, and vigilance would need to continue indefinitely. This wasn't a crisis with a neat conclusion. It was a new chapter in a world forever altered by hidden, powerful forces. By nightfall, the public had adapted to the new reality. Conversations focused on preparedness, resilience, and transparency. People understood that while fear was inevitable, action was the antidote. Communities worked together, governments coordinated openly where possible, and journalists held institutions accountable. The horrifying revelation Leno delivered had forced humanity to confront its vulnerabilities, but it had also awakened a collective determination to survive, adapt, and fight back. In the quiet hours, as the world braced for what might come next, one truth resonated universally. The broadcast was only the beginning. The race against time had started, and every individual, institution, and nation had a role to play. Failure was not an option, and ignorance no longer a refuge. For the first time, humanity faced the invisible forces operating in the shadows, and the world had no choice but to rise to the challenge.